The flames danced against the midnight sky like demons celebrating their feast. In the heart of Sand Valley, the old Morrison barn was being consumed by an inferno that could be seen for miles across the desert plains. The acrid smell of burning hay and timber filled the air while sparks flew like angry fireflies into the darkness. Cowman had been riding back from the northern pastures when he spotted the orange glow on the horizon. At 43 years old, he was a man carved by the harsh realities of frontier life. Weathered skin, steel-gray eyes, and hands that had seen more work than most men twice his age. He lived alone in a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, keeping to himself and speaking only when necessary. The townspeople of Sand Valley knew little about his past, and that's exactly how he preferred it. As he spurred his horse toward the fire, Cowman expected to find the usual chaos of a barn burning. Livestock scattered, property owners frantically trying to save what they could, and neighbors forming bucket brigades. What he didn't expect was the sound that cut through the roar of flames like a knife through silence, the desperate screams of a child. "Help me! Somebody help me!" The voice was coming from inside the burning structure. Without hesitation, Cowman dismounted and ran toward the barn. The heat hit him like a physical blow, and smoke stung his eyes, but he pressed forward. Through the haze and flames, he could see a small figure trapped in the far corner, surrounded by burning debris. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with sandy hair and tear-streaked cheeks blackened by soot. He was huddled behind an overturned wagon, too terrified to move as burning timbers crashed around him. The ceiling above was beginning to sag ominously. "Stay right there, son," Cowman shouted over the crackling flames. "I'm coming for you." He grabbed a horse blanket from a nearby stall and soaked it in the water trough. Wrapping it around himself, he plunged into the inferno. The heat was unbearable and the smoke burned his lungs with every breath. Burning hay fell like rain around him as he navigated through the maze of flames and debris. When he reached the boy, the child looked up at him with eyes wide with terror and hope. "Are you real?" the boy whispered, his voice barely audible above the roar of the fire. "Real as they come, kid," Cowman replied, wrapping the wet blanket around both of them. "Hold on tight and don't let go, no matter what." The journey back seemed to take an eternity. Burning beams crashed behind them, and the air grew thicker with each step. Cowman's lungs felt like they were on fire, and his vision began to blur from the smoke. But he kept moving, driven by an instinct he couldn't quite explain, a fierce protectiveness that surprised even him. They burst through the barn entrance just as the roof began to collapse. Cowman threw himself and the boy clear of the building, rolling in the dirt as burning debris rained down where they had been standing moments before. The barn groaned and surrendered to the flames with a thunderous crash that shook the ground. For several minutes they lay there gasping in the cool night air. The boy clung to Cowman's shirt, trembling not just from fear, but from something deeper, a trauma that seemed to go beyond the fire. When Cowman looked down at the child's face in the flickering light, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh bruises on the boy's arms and a cut on his lip that had nothing to do with the fire. "What's your name, son?" Cowman asked gently, helping the boy sit up. "Tommy," the child whispered, then quickly added, "Tommy Morrison." Morrison, the name of the family that owned the barn. But Cowman knew the Morrisons, an elderly couple with no children. He was about to ask more questions when the sound of approaching horses filled the air. Sheriff Bradley arrived first, followed by Doc Henderson and several townspeople who had seen the fire from town. They gathered around Cowman and the boy, their faces a mixture of relief and curiosity. "Well, I'll be damned," Sheriff Bradley said, dismounting from his horse. "Cowman, you crazy fool, you could have been killed. That barn went up like a tinderbox." "The boy was trapped inside," Cowman replied simply, his arms still protectively around Tommy's shoulders. Doc Henderson knelt down to examine the child. "Let me take a look at you, son. Are you hurt?" Tommy shrank back against Cowman, his eyes darting nervously between the faces surrounding him. "I'm okay," he mumbled, but his voice shook with fear. "He needs to be checked for smoke inhalation," Doc Henderson insisted, "and those burns on his hands need tending." As the doctor reached for Tommy, the boy suddenly grabbed Cowman's arm with surprising strength. "Don't leave me," he pleaded, his eyes wide with panic. "Please don't leave me with them." The desperation in the child's voice sent a chill through Cowman. He looked around at the gathered townspeople, familiar faces he'd seen countless times in Sand Valley, and wondered what could make a child so afraid of the very people who should be protecting him. "I'm not going anywhere, Tommy," Cowman said firmly. "You're safe now." But even as he spoke the words, Cowman couldn't shake the feeling that safety was exactly what this boy had been lacking long before the fire started. The bruises, the fear, the way Tommy had been in that barn in the middle of the night. None of it added up to an accident. Sheriff Bradley stepped closer, his expression serious. "Cowman, we need to figure out where this boy belongs. The Morrisons are visiting their daughter in Sacramento. Have been for 2 weeks. So what was he doing in their barn? Maybe he's a runaway," suggested Mrs. Patterson from the general store. "Could be he was just looking for shelter." Tommy's grip on Cowman's arm tightened, and the man felt the boy's whole body tense at the suggestion. Whatever the truth was, it was clear that Tommy Morrison, if that was even his real name, was running from something far more dangerous than a barn fire. As the crowd began to disperse and Doc Henderson prepared to take Tommy to his clinic, Cowman made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He stood up, lifting the boy in his arms. "The kid stays with me tonight," he announced, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who wouldn't be argued with. Sheriff Bradley frowned. "Now, Cowman, that's not exactly proper procedure. The boy's been through enough trauma for one night," Cowman interrupted. "He needs rest, not more strangers poking and prodding at him. Doc can check him over at my place." The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Cowman's expression stopped him. There was a protective fierceness there that reminded everyone present that despite his quiet nature, this was not a man to be crossed. As they rode toward Cowman's cabin, Tommy finally spoke again. "Why did you save me?" he asked, his small voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. Cowman considered the question for a long moment. The truth was, he didn't fully understand it himself. Something about the boy's situation resonated with him in a way that dredged up memories he'd spent years trying to bury. "Because everyone deserves a chance, son," he finally replied. "Everyone deserves someone who'll fight for them." But as they rode through the darkness toward an uncertain future, Cowman couldn't shake the feeling that saving Tommy from the fire had been the easy part. The real challenge was just beginning, and it would test everything he thought he knew about the quiet town of Sand Valley and the secrets its respectable citizens kept hidden in the shadows. The barn fire had revealed more than just burning timber and hay. It had exposed a truth that someone had been desperate to destroy. And now, with Tommy safe in his arms, Cowman found himself standing between a vulnerable child and forces he didn't yet understand, but was determined to face. Dawn broke over Sand Valley with an eerie stillness, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The acrid smell of smoke still lingered in the air, and a black scar marked the landscape where the Morrison barn had stood. Cowman sat on his porch, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, watching Tommy sleep through the cabin's single window. The boy had barely spoken since they'd arrived at the cabin the night before. Doc Henderson had examined him and confirmed what Cowman already suspected. The bruises were old, some healing, others fresh. The cut on his lip was at least a week old. Someone had been hurting this child long before the fire. Those injuries didn't come from any barn fire, Doc Henderson had whispered to Cowman as he packed up his medical bag. "That boy's been through hell, and I'd bet my practice it wasn't the first time." Now, in the morning light, Cowman found himself studying every detail of Tommy's appearance, looking for clues about who he really was. The boy's clothes were of good quality, not the rough homespun of a drifter's child, but the fine cotton and wool that spoke of a family with means. His hands, despite the fresh burns, were soft, suggesting he hadn't been living rough for long. The sound of approaching horses interrupted his thoughts. Sheriff Bradley rode up with Deputy Collins, their expressions grim. Behind them came Reverend Matthews and Mayor Hutchinson, the town's most prominent citizens. "Morning, Cowman," Sheriff Bradley called out as he dismounted. "We need to talk about the boy." Cowman set down his coffee and stood slowly. "What about him?" "Well, for starters, his name isn't Tommy Morrison," the sheriff replied. "We sent a telegram to Sacramento. The Morrisons confirmed they don't have any relatives named Tommy, and they've never seen the boy before." Mayor Hutchinson stepped forward, his considerable bulk straining against his vest. "This is a serious matter, Cowman. We have an unidentified child in our town, and we need to follow proper procedures. The boy needs to be placed in the care of the territorial authorities until his family can be located." "Over my dead body," Cowman replied quietly, but his tone carried the weight of absolute conviction. Reverend Matthews, a thin man with kind eyes, tried a gentler approach. "Brother Cowman, We understand your concern for the child, but surely you see that a single man living alone isn't the proper environment for a young boy. The church has connections with excellent orphanages. The boy stays with me, Cowman interrupted, at least until we figure out who's been beating him and why. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sheriff Bradley shifted uncomfortably. Now, Cowman, we don't know that anyone's been. Look at him, Sheriff, Cowman said, his voice rising slightly. Really look at him. Those bruises didn't come from falling off a horse or roughhousing with other kids. Someone's been using that child as a punching bag, and I'll be damned if I'm going to hand him over to strangers until we know who and why. Deputy Collins, a young man barely out of his teens, spoke up nervously. Maybe we should ask around town, see if anyone recognizes him. Someone must know something. It was a reasonable suggestion, but Cowman noticed the way Mayor Hutchinson's face darkened at the words. I hardly think that's necessary, the mayor said quickly. The boy is obviously a runaway from somewhere else. We should contact the territorial marshal and let them handle it. Why are you so eager to get rid of him? Cowman asked, studying the mayor's face carefully. I'm not eager to get rid of anyone, Hutchinson replied, but his voice carried a defensive edge. I'm simply trying to follow proper legal procedures. We can't have every drifter and vagrant thinking they can dump their unwanted children in our town. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the cabin door opening. Tommy appeared in the doorway, still wearing the oversized shirt Cowman had given him to sleep in. His hair was tousled, and his eyes were wide with the particular alertness of a child who had learned to wake up ready for danger. Cowman, the boy called softly, his voice carrying a note of panic. I'm right here, son, Cowman replied, moving toward the porch steps. These gentlemen just came by to check on you. Tommy's gaze swept over the assembled men, and Cowman watched his expression carefully. The boy's face remained neutral until his eyes landed on Mayor Hutchinson. Then, almost imperceptibly, Tommy took a step backward, his hand gripping the door frame. The reaction was subtle, but Cowman caught it. So did Sheriff Bradley, whose eyes narrowed as he looked between the boy and the mayor. Tommy, the sheriff said gently, can you tell us your real name? We'd like to help you find your family. The boy's eyes darted to Cowman, seeking permission or reassurance. When Cowman nodded encouragingly, Tommy spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. My name is Thomas, he said. Thomas Whitmore. The name hit the assembled men like a physical blow. Mayor Hutchinson went pale, and Reverend Matthews actually took a step backward. Even Sheriff Bradley's composure cracked for a moment. Cowman looked between them, his suspicions growing. You know that name. Whitmore, Sheriff Bradley repeated slowly. There was a family named Whitmore, but they left town years ago. Moved east, I think. That's right, Mayor Hutchinson said quickly, his voice tight. The Whitmores. Nice family. Had some financial troubles and decided to try their luck elsewhere. That was, must have been 5 or 6 years ago. But Tommy was shaking his head. I never left, he said, his voice growing stronger. I've been here the whole time. In the basement. He said I was dead to everyone else, that no one would ever come looking for me. The silence that followed was deafening. Cowman felt his blood turn to ice as the implications of the boy's words sank in. Who said that, Tommy? Who kept you in a basement? The boy's eyes went to Mayor Hutchinson again, and this time there was no mistaking the fear and recognition there. Him, Tommy whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the mayor. He's my father. The words exploded across the group like a bomb. Mayor Hutchinson's face went from pale to red to purple in the span of seconds. That's impossible, he sputtered. The boy is obviously confused, traumatized. He doesn't know what he's saying. But Sheriff Bradley was studying the boy's face with new interest. The eyes, he said slowly. He's got your eyes, Mayor, and the shape of his face. This is ridiculous, Hutchinson exploded. I won't stand here and be accused by some deranged child. Sheriff, I demand you arrest this man for kidnapping and remove the boy from his custody immediately. Cowman stepped protectively in front of Tommy, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Nobody's taking this boy anywhere until we get some answers. Cowman's right, Sheriff Bradley said, his voice carrying new authority. Mayor, I think you'd better come down to the office with me. We need to have a long talk about the Whitmore family and what really happened to them. I don't have to listen to this, Hutchinson shouted, backing toward his horse. This is all lies and speculation. I'm a respected member of this community, and I won't be slandered by some half-wild hermit and a confused child. He mounted his horse and spurted hard, riding away in a cloud of dust. The remaining men watched him go in stunned silence. Reverend Matthews was the first to speak. "Dear God," he whispered, "if what the boy says is true, then we've got a bigger problem than just a barn fire." Sheriff Bradley finished grimly. He turned to Cowman. "I'm going to need to talk to the boy, get his full story. But not here, not now. He's been through enough trauma." Cowman nodded. "Give us a day or two. Let him settle down, feel safe. Then we'll talk." As the men prepared to leave, Deputy Collins lingered behind. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "if Mayor Hutchinson really did what the boy says, keeping his own son prisoner for years, what kind of man does that?" Sheriff Bradley's expression was grim, the kind of man who'd burned down a barn to cover his tracks when the boy finally escaped. The words hung in the air long after the men had ridden away. Cowman sat down on the porch steps and pulled Tommy close to him. The boy was trembling, but there was something different in his posture now, a sense of relief, as if a terrible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "You did good, son," Cowman said softly. "That took real courage." Tommy looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. "He said if I ever told anyone, he'd kill me. He said no one would believe me anyway, because he's important and I'm nobody." "Well, he was wrong about that," Cowman replied firmly. "You're not nobody. You're Thomas Whitmore, and you're under my protection now. And as for being believed," he gestured toward the direction the sheriff had ridden, "I'd say people are starting to listen." But even as he spoke the words of comfort, Cowman knew their troubles were far from over. Mayor Hutchinson was a powerful man with connections throughout the territory. He wouldn't go down without a fight, and desperate men were capable of desperate acts. As if reading his thoughts, Tommy spoke again. "He's going to try to hurt us, isn't he?" Cowman considered lying, offering false reassurances. But this boy had been lied to enough. "Maybe," he said honestly. "But if he does, he'll have to go through me first. And I promise you, son, that's not going to be easy for him." The sun was climbing higher in the sky, burning off the morning mist and revealing the full extent of the previous night's destruction. The barn was nothing but a blackened skeleton now, but Cowman found himself wondering what other secrets lay buried in those ashes, and what lengths Mayor Hutchinson would go to keep them hidden. 3 days had passed since Tommy's revelation, and Sand Valley buzzed with whispered conversations and suspicious glances. The news had spread like wildfire through the small community, dividing the townspeople into camps of believers and skeptics. Some couldn't fathom that their respected mayor could be capable of such cruelty, while others began remembering small details that suddenly took on sinister new meanings. Cowman had spent those days getting Tommy's full story, and each detail made his blood boil hotter. The boy had been kept in a hidden basement beneath Mayor Hutchinson's house for nearly 4 years, ever since his mother had died of pneumonia. Hutchinson had told the town that he was sending the boy east to live with relatives, but instead had imprisoned his own son, claiming the child was a reminder of his shameful past. "My mother wasn't married to him," Tommy had explained in a quiet voice as they sat by the fireplace. "She worked in his house as a cook. When she got sick and died, he said I was a bastard who would ruin his reputation if anyone knew about me." The basement had been Tommy's entire world, a cramped, windowless space with a cot, a bucket, and whatever scraps of food Hutchinson remembered to bring down. The boy had been let out only at night, and only when the mayor was certain no one would see him. "How did you escape?" Cowman had asked. Tommy's eyes had grown distant. He'd been drinking more lately, getting angrier. 3 nights ago he came down and started hitting me worse than usual. Said he was tired of keeping me around, that maybe it was time to solve the problem permanently. When he passed out drunk, I managed to pick the lock with a hairpin my mother had given me. I ran to the Morrison barn because I knew it was empty. Thought I could hide there until I figured out what to do. And the fire? He must have followed me," Tommy said, his voice barely a whisper. "I woke up and smelled smoke. The whole barn was already burning. I think he was trying to kill me." Now, as Cowman sat on his porch cleaning his rifle, he watched Sheriff Bradley approach with a grim expression. The lawman dismounted and walked up the steps, his face etched with exhaustion and anger. "We searched Hutchinson's house," Bradley said without preamble. "Found the basement, just like the boy described. There's evidence someone was living down there for a long time. Food scraps, old clothes, even some books and drawings that look like a child made them." Cowman continued cleaning his rifle. his movements methodical and precise. "Where's Hutchinson now?" "That's the problem," Bradley replied, settling into the chair beside him. "He's gone. Packed up and left town sometime during the night. Took his horse and whatever he could carry. Left everything else behind. Running makes him look guilty. That's what I figure. But it also makes him dangerous. A man like that, with his reputation destroyed and nothing left to lose." Bradley shook his head. "He might try to come back and finish what he started." As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy appeared in the doorway. Over the past few days, the boy had begun to look more like a normal child, and less like a frightened animal. Regular meals and kindness had put some color in his cheeks, and the constant fear was slowly leaving his eyes. "Sheriff Bradley," Tommy said politely, "did you find anything else in the house?" Bradley's expression softened when he looked at the boy. "We found some things that belonged to your mother. Personal items, photographs. I thought you might want them." Tommy's face lit up with the first genuine smile Cowman had seen from him. "Pictures of my mother? Really?" "Really. They're back at the office. You can come by any time to get them." Bradley paused, then continued more seriously. "Tommy, I need to ask you something important. Do you remember your mother ever mentioning any other family? Aunts, uncles, grandparents? Anyone who might have legal claim to you?" The boy shook his head. "She always said it was just us. Her family back east disowned her when she had me, and she never talked about my father's people." Bradley nodded, then looked at Cowman. "That simplifies things legally. Without any blood relatives to claim him, and with Hutchinson's abandonment, the territorial court will likely approve a formal guardianship arrangement if you're willing." "I'm willing," Cowman said without hesitation. "More than willing." Tommy's smile grew even brighter, but it was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. A group of riders was coming up the road, and Cowman recognized several prominent townspeople among them. His hand moved instinctively to his rifle. "Easy," Bradley said, standing up. "I think they're here to help." The group was led by Reverend Matthews and Doc Henderson, followed by Mrs. Patterson from the general store, the blacksmith Jake Morrison, and several other respected citizens. They dismounted and approached the porch with serious but friendly expressions. "Cowman, Tommy," Reverend Matthews said, removing his hat, "we've come to talk to you both." "About what?" Cowman asked, his voice cautious. Doc Henderson stepped forward. "About what happened to this boy, and what we're going to do about it. The whole town's been talking, and most folks have come to the same conclusion. We failed this child. We let a monster hide among us for years, and we didn't see what was right under our noses." Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously. "That poor boy's mother, Sarah Whitmore, was one of the kindest souls I ever knew. When she died, we all just accepted Hutchinson's story about sending the boy away. We should have asked more questions. We should have done a lot of things differently," Jake Morrison added. "But we can't change the past. What we can do is make sure this boy has a future." Reverend Matthews reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "We've taken up a collection. Every family in town contributed something. It's not a fortune, but it should help with the boy's care and education." Cowman looked at the envelope suspiciously. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Doc Henderson said firmly. "It's restitution. We all bear some responsibility for what happened to Tommy. This is our way of trying to make it right." Tommy stepped closer to Cowman, looking up at him with questioning eyes. After a moment, Cowman nodded and accepted the envelope. "Thank you," he said simply. "There's something else," Reverend Matthews continued. "We've been talking about Hutchinson's property, the house, the land, his business interests. Legally, with him gone and no will, it all becomes territorial property. But we're going to petition the court to have it awarded to Tommy as compensation for what was done to him." The boy's eyes widened. "You mean the house would be mine? Eventually, when you come of age," the Reverend confirmed. "Until then, it would be held in trust. But yes, it would be yours." Cowman saw the complex emotions playing across Tommy's face. Fear, anger, and something that might have been satisfaction. "What do you think, son? Would you want that?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with a maturity that belied his years. I think my mother would like knowing that the place where she worked so hard would belong to me someday. But I don't ever want to live in that basement again." "You won't have to," Mrs. Patterson assured him. "That basement will be sealed up permanently. The house can be renovated, made into something completely different." Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat. "There's still the matter of Hutchinson. He's out there somewhere, and he might try to come back. I've sent word to the territorial marshal, but until he's caught, we all need to stay vigilant." As if his words were prophetic, the sound of a single horse approaching at high speed reached their ears. Everyone turned to see a rider coming hard up the road, dust flying behind him. As he drew closer, they could see it was young Billy Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's son. "Sheriff!" Billy called out as he reined in his horse. "Sheriff, you need to come quick. Mr. Hutchinson's back. He's at the church, and he's got a gun." The blood drained from every face on the porch. Sheriff Bradley was already moving toward his horse. "How many people are in the church?" "Just old Mrs. Carmichael and her granddaughter," Billy replied breathlessly. "Sunday service isn't until tomorrow, but they went in to arrange flowers. Mr. Hutchinson's got them trapped inside." Cowman was already reaching for his gun belt. "Tommy, get inside the cabin and stay there." "No!" the boy protested. "I want to come with you." "Absolutely not," Cowman said firmly. "This is exactly what he wants, to draw you out where he can get to you. You stay here with Mrs. Patterson. I'll stay with him," the store owner confirmed. "Go do what you need to do." As the men mounted their horses, Tommy grabbed Cowman's arm. "Be careful," he said, his voice small and frightened. "He's really dangerous when he's been drinking." Cowman knelt down to the boy's level. "I'll be careful, son, and I'll be back. That's a promise." The ride to the church took only minutes, but it felt like hours. As they approached the small white building at the center of town, they could see Hutchinson's horse tied outside. The church doors were closed, and an eerie silence hung over the scene. Sheriff Bradley held up his hand, signaling the others to stop. "Hutchinson," he called out, "this is Sheriff Bradley. Let the women go, and we can talk about this." The church doors opened slightly, and Mayor Hutchinson appeared in the gap. Even from a distance they could see he was disheveled and wild-eyed. He held a pistol in his shaking hand. "I want the boy," Hutchinson shouted, his voice slurred with alcohol. "Bring me that lying little bastard, or these women die." "You know we can't do that," Bradley replied. "Let them go, and we'll discuss your grievances." Hutchinson laughed, a sound devoid of sanity. "Grievances? That boy has destroyed everything I worked for. My reputation, my position, my future, all because of one night of weakness with his whore mother." Cowman felt his trigger finger itch, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was a delicate situation that required patience, not gunplay. "The boy's just a child," Reverend Matthews called out, trying a different approach. "Whatever happened between you and his mother, he's innocent in all this." "Innocent?" Hutchinson spat. "He's living proof of my sin. Every day he drew breath was a reminder of my shame. I should have killed him years ago." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. There was no longer any doubt about Hutchinson's guilt or his intentions. Sheriff Bradley made a subtle hand signal to his deputy, who began moving around to the back of the church. "Mayor, you're not thinking clearly. You're a respected man in this community. We can work something out." "Respected?" Hutchinson laughed again. "I'm ruined, finished, all because of that boy and his lies." "They weren't lies," came a small voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see Tommy walking up the road, his face set with determination. Mrs. Patterson was running after him, calling for him to come back. "Tommy, no!" Cowman shouted, spurring his horse toward the boy. But Tommy held up his hand. "It's okay," he said, his voice carrying across the distance. "I know what I'm doing." He walked steadily toward the church, stopping just outside pistol range. "I'm here," he called to Hutchinson. "Let the ladies go, and you can have me." "Tommy, get back," Sheriff Bradley ordered, but the boy ignored him. Hutchinson's eyes lit up with a mad gleam. "That's right, boy. Come to your father. Come and pay for all the trouble you've caused." Tommy took another step forward. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," he said, his young voice carrying surprising strength. "You can't hurt me worse than you already have." "We'll see about that," Hutchinson snarled, raising his pistol. But as he did, several things happened at once. Deputy Collins appeared at the back of the church and tackled Mrs. Carmichael and her granddaughter to safety. Sheriff Bradley drew his weapon, and Cowman, seeing the pistol aimed at Tommy, did what came naturally to a man who had spent his life protecting what mattered. His rifle shot echoed across the town like thunder. Hutchinson spun around from the impact, his own shot going wide. He staggered, looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then up at Cowman with something that might have been surprise. You shot me," he gasped. "You aimed a gun at a child." Cowman replied coldly. What did you expect? Hutchinson collapsed to his knees, then fell forward onto the church steps. Doc Henderson rushed to check on him, but it was clear from his expression that there was nothing to be done. Tommy stood frozen in the middle of the road, staring at the man who had been both his father and his tormentor. Cowman dismounted and walked to him, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Is he? Tommy asked quietly. Yes, Cowman replied. He can't hurt you anymore. Tommy nodded slowly, then looked up at Cowman with eyes that held a mixture of relief, sadness, and something else. Gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. Cowman pulled the boy close, feeling the weight of responsibility and love that had grown between them over the past few days. You don't need to thank me, son. Family protects family. As the townspeople gathered around them, offering comfort and support, Tommy looked up at Cowman with a question in his eyes. Does this mean I can really stay with you? Forever? Cowman smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in years. Forever and a day, Tommy. Forever and a day. 6 months had passed since that terrible day at the church, and Sand Valley had slowly begun to heal from the wounds of its dark secret. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of harvested crops and the promise of winter snows. The blackened scar where the Morrison barn had stood was now covered with new grass, and life had found its rhythm again. Cowman stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching Tommy practice his reading under the shade of an old oak tree. The boy had grown in the months since his rescue, not just physically, though he'd gained weight and height, but in confidence and spirit. The haunted look had left his eyes, replaced by the natural curiosity and energy of a healthy child. How's he doing with his lessons? Asked a familiar voice behind him. Cowman turned to see Reverend Matthews approaching, a leather satchel in his hand. The preacher had become a regular visitor, helping with Tommy's education and serving as an unofficial counselor for both of them as they navigated their new relationship. Better than I ever did in school, Cowman replied with pride. Kid's got a sharp mind, soaks up knowledge like a sponge. That's wonderful to hear. I brought him some new books, adventure stories I thought he might enjoy. Matthews paused, studying Cowman's face. And how are you adjusting to fatherhood? Cowman chuckled, a sound that had become more common in recent months. Never thought I'd be raising a boy at my age, but I can't imagine life without him now. He's given me something I didn't know I was missing. It was true. The lonely cabin that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a home. Tommy's laughter echoed through the rooms. His questions filled the silence, and his presence had awakened something in Cowman that he'd thought was long dead. The capacity to love and be loved in return. Tommy, Cowman called out. Reverend Matthews brought you something. The boy looked up from his book, his face lighting up with excitement. He ran over to them, his movements free and unguarded in a way that still amazed Cowman. There were no more flinches, no more fearful glances over his shoulder. New books? Tommy asked eagerly, accepting the satchel from the Reverend. Adventures on the high seas, Matthews replied with a smile. Pirates and treasure and brave heroes. Tommy's eyes went wide. Real pirates? Well, stories about pirates, the Reverend clarified, but based on real history. As Tommy eagerly examined his new books, Sheriff Bradley rode up with his usual purposeful stride. The lawman had become a frequent visitor as well, partly for official business, but mostly because he'd grown genuinely fond of both Cowman and Tommy. Afternoon, folks, Bradley said, dismounting. Got some news I thought you'd want to hear. Cowman tensed slightly. Even after all these months, unexpected news still made him worry about threats to their peaceful life. Good news, Bradley added quickly, seeing his expression. The territorial court has finalized the property transfer. Tommy, as of today, you officially own the Hutchinson house and all the land that goes with it. Tommy looked up from his books, his expression thoughtful. The whole house? The whole thing, Bradley confirmed, along with about 50 acres of good farmland. When you come of age, you'll be one of the wealthier young men in the territory. What do you think about that, son? Cowman asked. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the careful consideration he'd developed when discussing serious matters. I think I'd like to turn it into something good. Maybe a school, or a place where kids who don't have families can live. The adults exchanged glances, impressed by the boy's maturity and generosity. After everything he'd been through, his first thought was still about helping others. That's a fine idea, Reverend Matthews said warmly. Though you don't have to decide anything right now. You've got plenty of time to think about what you want to do. Speaking of the future, Sheriff Bradley continued, there's something else. The territorial governor has been following Tommy's story, and he's asked me to extend an invitation. He'd like Tommy to attend the Territorial Academy in the capital. Full scholarship, of course. Cowman felt his heart skip a beat. The Territorial Academy was the finest school in the region, attended by the sons of wealthy families and future leaders. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would mean Tommy leaving Sand Valley, leaving him. That's quite an honor, he managed to say, keeping his voice steady. Tommy looked between the adults, sensing the undercurrents of emotion. Would I have to go away? It's a boarding school, Bradley explained gently. You'd live there during the school year, but you'd come home for holidays and summers. I don't want to go away, Tommy said immediately, moving closer to Cowman. This is my home. Cowman is my family. The simple declaration hit Cowman like a physical blow. He knelt down to Tommy's level, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. Tommy, this is an amazing opportunity. The kind of education they could give you there. It could open doors I never could. I don't care about doors, Tommy replied stubbornly. I care about staying with you. Cowman looked into the boy's eyes and saw his own fears reflected there. The terror of abandonment, the desperate need for security and love. He understood then that this wasn't just about education or opportunity. For Tommy, it was about trust and the promise that he would never be left alone again. What if, Cowman said slowly, what if we found a way for you to get that education without leaving home? How? Tommy asked hopefully. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat. Actually, I might have an idea about that. The Territorial Academy has been experimenting with a new program, sending their best teachers to establish satellite schools in smaller communities. If Sand Valley were to petition for such a school, the town would support it, Sheriff Bradley added. Especially after everything that's happened. People want to do right by Tommy, and having a proper school would benefit all the children in the area. Tommy's face lit up with excitement. Really? We could have a real school here? It would take some work, Matthews cautioned. We'd need to raise funds, find a suitable building, convince the territorial board that Sand Valley is a good location. What about the Hutchinson house? Tommy suggested. It's big enough, and it's mine now. We could turn it into a school. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them, transforming the place of Tommy's imprisonment into a center of learning and hope. It was perfect in a way that felt almost like destiny. That's a wonderful idea, Cowman said, his voice thick with emotion. Your mother would be proud. Over the following weeks, the entire town threw itself into the project, with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. It was as if the community had found a way to channel their guilt and regret over Tommy's suffering into something positive and meaningful. Mrs. Patterson organized fundraising efforts, with bake sales and church socials raising money for books and supplies. Jake Morrison and the other craftsmen volunteered their labor to renovate the house, tearing out the basement entirely and replacing it with a bright, airy classroom. Doc Henderson used his connections in the territorial capital to advocate for the satellite school program. Tommy was involved in every aspect of the planning, his input valued and respected by the adults. He chose the colors for the walls, helped design the layout of the classrooms, and even suggested that they plant a garden where students could learn about agriculture and botany. As the renovations progressed, Cowman often found himself standing in what had once been Hutchinson's parlor, marveling at the transformation. The dark, oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by light and hope. Windows had been enlarged, walls had been painted in cheerful colors, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through rooms that had once known only silence and fear. It's amazing what a little love and hard work can accomplish, Reverend Matthews observed one afternoon as they watched Tommy help Jake Morrison install new bookshelves. Amazing what that boy can accomplish, Cowman corrected. This was all his idea, his vision. Guided by your love and support, Matthews replied. Don't underestimate your role in this, Cowman. That boy has flourished under your care in ways that go far beyond just healing from trauma. You've given him the confidence to dream big and the security to take risks. It was true. Tommy had grown into a natural leader, organizing the other children in town to help with the school project, and mediating disputes with a wisdom that belied his years. He was becoming the kind of person who would make a real difference in the world. The grand opening of the Sand Valley Academy took place on a crisp October morning, with representatives from the territorial government in attendance. The governor himself had come to cut the ribbon, praising the community's initiative and Tommy's remarkable story of survival and transformation. This school represents the very best of what we can achieve when we come together for a common cause, the governor said in his speech. But more than that, it represents the triumph of hope over despair, of love over hatred, of community over isolation. Tommy, dressed in his finest clothes and standing beside Cowman, beamed with pride as the ribbon was cut and the first students filed into their new classrooms. The boy who had once been hidden away in darkness was now at the center of a celebration of learning and possibility. As the ceremony concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Tommy and Cowman found themselves alone on the front steps of the school. The autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Are you happy?" Cowman asked, putting his arm around Tommy's shoulders. Tommy leaned against him, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he replied. "But you know what makes me happiest?" "What's that, son?" "Knowing that no matter how big this school gets, or how many students come here, or what happens in the future, I'll always have a home with you." Cowman felt tears prick his eyes. "Always," he promised, "no matter what." As they sat there watching the last light fade from the sky, Cowman reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a lonely man living on the edges of society, convinced that his best days were behind him. Now he was a father, a pillar of the community, and a part of something larger than himself. The fire that had brought them together had destroyed more than just a barn. It had burned away the lies and secrets that had poisoned Sand Valley. In its place, something new and beautiful had grown. A school that would educate generations of children. A community that had learned the value of vigilance and compassion. A family forged not by blood but by choice and love. "Cowman," Tommy said quietly. "Yes, son. Do you think my mother can see this? The school, I mean, and how everything turned out?" Cowman looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "I think she can," he said softly. "And I think she's proud of the man you're becoming." Tommy smiled, that radiant expression that never failed to warm Cowman's heart. "I hope so. I want to make her proud. And you too. You already have, Tommy. Every single day." As they finally stood to head home, Tommy paused and looked back at the school one more time. "You know what I want to put on a plaque by the front door?" "What's that?" "In memory of Sarah Whitmore, who taught her son that love is stronger than fear." Cowman nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I think that's perfect, son. Just perfect." They walked home together under the starlit sky. A man and a boy who had found in each other the family they had both been searching for. Behind them, the Sand Valley Academy stood as a testament to the power of redemption, the strength of community, and the unbreakable bonds that can form between two souls who refuse to give up on each other. The lonely Cowman had become a father. The frightened boy had become a leader. And Sand Valley had become a place where miracles were not only possible, but inevitable, as long as people were willing to fight for what was right and never stop believing in the power of love to transform even the darkest of circumstances. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, carrying the sound of progress and possibility. But Cowman and Tommy were in no hurry to chase after distant horizons. They had found everything they needed right here, in this small town that had learned to see past its mistakes and embrace a future built on hope, healing, and the unshakable conviction that every child deserves a chance to shine. The story that had begun with fire and fear had ended with light and love. And in the years to come, as students filled the halls of the Sand Valley Academy and went out into the world to make their own mark, they would carry with them the lesson that Tommy Whitmore and his adoptive father had taught their community. That sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who simply refuse to walk away when someone needs help, and that the most powerful force in the universe is the love between a parent and child, regardless of how that family comes to be. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.